So, hello, welcome everybody. I think we are ready to start. Welcome to the panel discussion against opening civil research facilities for military projects, which is meant also to be a contribution to discussions we have at DESY. The panel discussion will be chaired by Michelangelo Mangano from CERN. Michelangelo is a physicist at the theory department at CERN, and of course, rather well known among all the particle physicists. And he is promoting since very long the Science for Peace idea. He's also a very active member of the Science for Peace Forum since its foundation in spring 2022. But before we start the panel discussion, let me briefly recap what has happened and why we have this discussion today. Already back in 1983 or 1985, Ronald Reagan proposed the Star Wars program, the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI. One of the ideas was to use particle beams and lasers, space-based missile systems, and satellites spanning the globe. A member of the DESY machine group was invited for consultations on this program in 1985. At the end, this program was rejected, also because a lot of protests from scientists, with a petition of more than 300 scientists from DESY alone, but also because the program itself was found to be not feasible, at least at that time. Today, we can read in the news that laser weapons have been developed and successfully tested and are being employed now. One of the next steps are being high-energy lasers. On June 17th, the DESY Directorate announced to start a discussion to rethink the guiding principles, which say that at DESY, which say that our research pursues goals that are peaceful and serve the civil society. This announcement to start a discussion at DESY on opening civil research facilities for military projects follows a discussion outlined in a position paper of the German ministry, as well as a white paper of the EU Commission. Following that announcement on June 28th, the Hamburger Morgenpost, a newspaper of Hamburg, published an article on military research at DESY, ? On June 28th, we started a petition opening civil research facilities to military projects. Is not in our name, which now has more than 260 signatures just from people at DESY alone, which is more than about 10% of the DESY employees. And here is a screenshot of this petition, which is available in German and in English. On June 23rd, a mail from the DESY Directorate to all employees was sent around explaining further the thoughts they had. And they say, should we, under certain conditions and to a certain extent, not enable scientific use of Petra 3 or maybe in future of Petra 4 when the results can be used in the context of security, military readiness, and defensive preparations next to civil uses? On August 27, parliamentarians sent in a written question to the Hamburg Senate, the government of the state Hamburg, where they specifically asked about military use at DESY and military research at DESY. On August 28th, the newly founded Science for Peace at DESY group has distributed flyers in front of the gates of DESY Hamburg, and here are some nice screenshots shown. The weather was pretty nice, but it was very early in the morning. With that, we come to today. We have a panel discussion where we want to discuss issues on opening civil research facilities for military projects and contribute in that way to a discussion at DESY. The panel consists of these people. I guess Michelangelo will introduce them when they will be asked their questions. With this, I think I will hand over to Michelangelo to start the panel discussion. Michelangelo, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hannes, and welcome everyone. And I would invite John to get started. We organized the panel in the following manner. John will give a general introduction about the Science for Peace idea in the context of the CERN laboratory, how it developed through the creation of the lab and its existence. Then we will have 3 contributions on the civic clause movement and the discussions at universities in German. We will have 2 contributions on the international context, and then a few contributions about the specific situation at DESY. So we start from John, who's currently Professor of Theoretical Physics at King's College London, after having been for most of his career a member of the Theory Division and Theory Department at CERN, where he was division leader between 1988 and 1994. As part of his responsibility at CERN, and most relevant for this discussion, is the role he played as advisor for non-member state relations, which means in particularly relations, say, with Russia, Ukraine, Serbia, and others. John also is an active member of the Science for Peace Forum, and I give him the floor. We expect our panelists to speak for about 5 minutes, so that at the end we will have time for discussion. And I would suggest that after each presentation, if there are questions, they should be limited to factual questions on things that have been said and they may need to be clarified, but the overall discussion that better waits for the end when we got everybody's perspective. John.
Okay, well, Hannes and Michelangelo, thanks very much for the introduction. So, of course, this discussion is about, DESY. As an outsider, I feel, a little bit out of place, but nevertheless, I hope I can bring a useful perspective and context for this discussion. So, as already been mentioned, my main experience is at CERN, and most of you probably know that there's an explicit clause in the CERN Convention saying that CERN shall have nothing to do with military research. Now, because this is in the CERN Convention, it's basically hardwired in the way that CERN operates. It would be basically impossible for Council to agree on any modification to the CERN Convention. Now, I think this exclusion of military research at CERN has been a key ingredient in enabling CERN to become as international as it now is, expanding from an initial nucleus of like-minded Western European countries to a broader spectrum of European countries, some of which have different political points of view, and also to bring into the fold, to some extent, countries which, some of which Michelangelo has mentioned. So for many years, we had collaboration with Russia. Serbia became a member a few years ago. Countries like India and Pakistan, which are often at odds politically, both became associate members of CERN a few years ago. So I think that, as I was saying, Science for Peace is firmly embedded, hardwired in the CERN Convention, and it's one of the things that has enabled CERN to appeal to a very broad international community. So I just wanted to mention one anecdote which illustrates Science for Peace in action. About 20 years ago, in my official capacity, I was accompanying the then Director General of CERN on a visit to Pakistan. And we were received at a Pakistani research laboratory. And one of the people that we were talking to revealed the fact that his laboratory also did work on lasers for the Pakistani military, to which CERN Director General immediately said, "We cannot collaborate with you." End of discussion. So the principles which underlie science for peace, I think, in my experience, have been quite strongly applied by the CERN DG. So turning now from CERN to DESY, I figured out that my first visit to DESY came 49 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. And one of the things that's always impressed me with DESY has been its very straightforward, honest, and open style of working, attitude not just to physics, but to other issues as well. I would like to contrast this with several other laboratories that I visited, which do conduct military research. And in our private discussion, Saclay has been mentioned, also visited Los Alamos and Livermore in the United States. So these conduct civil research, they conduct military research, and there is a fence in between them. So, I ask myself, does DESY really want to have a fence down the middle of the DESY site? It's not even clear to me where you would put such a fence. If, as the DESY Directorate is saying, you want to use Petra 3 and eventually Petra 4 for both civilian and military research, are you going to have a fence between two beam lines? How are you going to actually operationally achieve any sort of separation between what is presumably in general classified military research from open civilian research? And I can see all sorts of other issues, some of which have been raised in internal science for peace discussions. Will there be restrictions on access to the DESY site? Will there be enhanced and obtrusive security presence? And I would add to this one final point before I finish. So many people working at DESY staff, for example, were recruited to do civilian research, or if they're not research scientists, to support civilian research. And many of them, I think would have moral and ethical objections to being required to do or support military-related research. And but research scientists have some autonomy. But supposing that you're an accelerator physicist, are you now going to be forced to support military research on the DESY site by switching on one particular beamline as opposed to another? I find all this extremely unpleasant to contemplate. Anyway, those are the few remarks that I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thanks. That was very interesting and relevant to this discussion. Is there any quick question for John on the details of what he said? Marcus?
Yes, Marcus Steele. Can you hear me?
Yes.
John, you mentioned COR, which is involved in military research. Can you explain briefly how it is possible that groups from COR are then involved in experiments at CERN?
So I think this comes back to the fact that CA is actually segmented, and there's a fence. Okay, and so the people who are on one side of the fence have nothing to do with the military, and the same is true of Los Alamos and Livermore, by the way. So the thing which I find difficult to imagine, sorry, there's one point that I didn't emphasize. So for the facilities which are used by the military researchers and by the civilian researchers at all the labs that I mentioned are entirely separate. But if I understand the concept that's being considered by the DESY Directorate, the same facility would be used for civilian and for military research, which to me puts the whole thing on a different basis. We're using the same accelerator to discover fundamental physics and to do other things.
Thank you.
Okay, so we move to our next contributor, and I would like to call on Jonathan Boylens, who's a student of biophysics at the University of Frankfurt am Main. He's part of the left-wing student organization SDS. He's also active in the student council of the Faculty of Physics. He's part of a nationwide network for civil clauses in Germany, which aims to promote civil and peaceful research towards a sustainable world. And so he will give us a perspective on the civil clause movement in Germany. Jonathan.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation. The current situation for the civil clause movement is very turbulent right now. There's a lot going on in Germany at this stage. There have been calls on the federal level, but also on the more local level of the individual states to revoke or even forbid civil clauses in universities. So in Bavaria, for example, there has been passed a new law by the state parliament, which completely forbids civil clauses from being put into existence, even though there actually are none in any constitutions of any university in Bavaria. So the modus operandi is basically preventing the promotion of peaceful research from even happening. Bavaria is in this case a very interesting example because it has historically been a sort of playing field for experiments in science policy and in other fields of politics as well. And this is, so to speak, a test case for future developments also in Germany. In the state I'm currently living in Hesse, we have the same kind of situation going on, not as drastic, but into the same direction. So we also had the state government give themselves the task of challenging the civil clauses at the universities. This also includes the Frankfurt University. But as of yet, nothing concrete has happened. At the same time, a member of parliament on the federal stage who comes from Hesse has called this step a leading step, also a step that other states will have to follow in order to open up civil and public research for the armaments industry in Germany. So this is the politicians in Germany who call for the opening up of civil public universities are very clear on this. The interests that they follow are those of the armaments industry. With all this said, we of course have been very busy in the last few months. On the federal stage, we've also had a paper which Hannes briefly mentioned, a paper from the Ministry for Research and for Education, which called for pretty explicitly for the militarization of German research facilities, especially the public sector, and for the dividing lines between these sectors to be softened up. It's interesting because they speak of an editing of the civil clause and not of a straight up prohibition. So they are taking the path of peace is war. And if you want peace, you must prepare for war and thus also promote military research. And this is a little bit more difficult strategy to debunk and also fight against. But this is what we are doing right now. We wrote a commentary on this position from the Educational Ministry, which can be found on our website, civilklausel.de. And I welcome you all to read it. Yes, why do we even fight for the civil clause at the present time? Why is it so important right now? Well, as I said, the course of the German science policy right now is if you want peace, prepare for war. And this is, of course, not the direction we want to take. We have the very strong opinion that if you want peace, you must prepare for peace. And science must play its role in this preparation. And this is why we speak in favor of civil clauses for all German universities in Hesse, in Bavaria, but also in all the other states, and for the preservation of those that already exist. Right now, we have 70 civil clauses roundabout in Germany, which is a very good thing. And we must expand this repertoire. Germany is in its history a very, I would say, unique example. The civil clauses themselves are a rather rare thing in international comparison. This stems from the fact that Germany, along with Japan, were the losing powers in the Second World War, and this actually led to the instatement of civil clauses in these two countries at the universities. Japan is the other such country where we have something that you can call a civil clause. In the other countries in Europe right now, it's not as the fight for civil research is not as explicit as it maybe is in Germany, but from some reactions that can be read about the white paper that Hannes mentioned in the beginning from the European Commission for also the softening up of the limits between civilian and military research. You can see that, especially in Italy and in Ireland, people in academic institutions have been very reserved about this militarization of research also on a European level. And this is, I think, the direction that in general, a lot of academic institutions have had in the last year or so, with the political situation changing very quickly. And yeah, so how does this actually all fit into the question of DESY? I think like Bavaria, as a state where civil clauses have been prohibited now formally, DESY could also have a role of an example of an academic institution where if this step is taken, it will lead to more public scientific institutions to maybe reevaluate their position on civil research and thus open a gate for discussion about the militarization of research in Germany. So that is why this panel that we are having right now is very important, but also the preservation of the civil orientation in the research at DESY is very important because it is one of the small battlefields, so to speak, where this fight for the research for everybody and not just particular interests is being led. In our movement, we have heard that the University of Hamburg, or some academics at the University of Hamburg have expressed concerns about this change of policy at DESY, and have even gone so far as to say that if DESY actually decides to pull through with this plan by the directorate, it could actually hinder cooperation between the University of Hamburg and DESY, because the University of Hamburg actually has a civil clause, and it would make it very difficult to argue for cooperation with an institution that actively promotes military research. This is a small overview from the movement here in Germany.
Thank you, Jonathan. Any quick question to him? Of the specific of the relation with Hamburg, we will hear Moody later. She will elaborate, I guess, on this point. If there are no specific questions, we can move to the next contribution, which is still on the same subject, and that's from Jürgen Schäffren, who's Professor of Geography Emeritus and Chair of a research group on climate change and security at University of Hamburg. He studied physics. He worked in interdisciplinary research groups and networks in environment and peace, including Janus, NatWis, VDW, and the magazine Wissenschaft und Frieden. Jürgen, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. We have already heard a lot about this civil clause and the origins of this idea of having peaceful research and civil research. I mean, this goes back to the post-Second World War order, in which, at least for nuclear research, there was the idea of having peaceful research, although it's not easy to distinguish peaceful and military nuclear research. As well as space research. The European Space Agency was later founded, also had this concept of peaceful research as a goal. And that was established also in organizations like the Karlsruhe Institute and also the researchers in Japan, who from the beginning found that peaceful research should be in conjunction with the Constitution of Japan to work for peace and against war and military research. This debate continued in particular in the 1980s, which Hannes Jung mentioned already. We took part in this debate on the strategic defense initiatives, the idea of the American president to develop the space shield. And he asked the researchers to provide a missile defense system against nuclear weapons. And there was a resistance movement in the United States, and Germany in particular, of several thousand researchers against participating in this military program, and instead work for more peaceful conceptions, which contributed in the end to the end of the Cold War times. And at the same time, there were some initiatives that the civil clause movement basically goes back to the 1980s. For instance, the civil clause in Bremen in 1986 basically follows this conception of resisting against military research and working for peaceful and civil research. But this continued after the end of the Cold War. We had a conference in Munich in 1992, which was co-organized by the Janus Group in Technical University of Darmstadt, was explicitly addressing the conceptions of dual use after the end of the Cold War, and developed this as part of a peaceful development after the end of the Cold War, which in the beginning was hopeful, but was not really fully elaborated, and was also initiatives for a nuclear weapon-free world, and many positive and constructive ideas in which science could contribute to peace building mechanisms. And the results of that conference in Munich were published in a book on the ambivalence and the dual use of science in Munich. So Technical University of Darmstadt was one of the universities where the civil clause was developed, and this whole debate came up as a new wave in 2009 and 2010. Basically, together with the conversion of the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology from nuclear to other research, and there was a debate not only among students were always the drivers, but also among researchers to have a peaceful research as part of the main goal of this new established institution, KIT. So this induced initiatives in other universities in Cologne, for instance, and North Rhine-Westphalia also took up a civil clause, the whole state, and was supported by other universities in North Rhine-Westphalia. There was activities in 2009 at Tübingen, Konstanz, together with activities in Karlsruhe, where also American scientists like Subrata Ghosh spoke from the MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, brought up his ideas for the civil clause, basically on the negative experience of the United States, where almost 2/3 of the research is for military purposes. And that was seen as a negative example, which should not be followed in Germany. The number of civil clauses has been growing until 2015 to 23. There was a major report on the civil clause movement 23, and now it's I think more than 60 civil clauses in many universities. There have been also established university scientific institutions like the German Wissenschaftsrat, which took more a position in favor of civil research. And now the civil clause movement came under pressure, on the one hand, because many civil clauses were just statements by universities, but they were not really fully implemented. And in some cases, there were violations of the civil clauses, and this got more in conflict with the actual militarization of science that we experienced in recent years around the Ukraine war, in particular, Gaza war and other wars, put pressure, and there are now official institutions arguing that the military should have a closer impact and involvement in university academic research. The Bavarian there's a Bavarian law that requires universities in Bavaria to take part and will collaborate with the Bundeswehr, with the federal army. And researchers formally could not resist against that requirement. And there is a concern that this might be extended to the whole state of Germany. This deeper involvement with military affairs. And this is also the reason why we have this meeting here. At the same time, we have the white paper from the European Union. We have the position paper from the German Federal Ministry on Education and Research. And there's more pressure on individuals, even the possible criminalization of some individuals who shout up their criticism too loudly. And we should consider this possibility that they can possibly lose their job if they speak up too loudly. So this requires a kind of collective activity and effort to avoid this individualization and criminalization of individual scientists. And at the same time, we should continue developing peaceful alternatives. So international cooperation is very important. That also avoids sanctions in international science collaboration between so-called enemies. I think science can continue to be a connector for peaceful purposes. Peace research can be a contribution, but also in other environmental research and other fields of research can be contributing to this international cooperation of science. to avoid this militarization. Thank you very much so much for now.
Thank you, Jürgen. Any question for Jürgen? Okay, then we move to Gudi. Gudi Morgat-Pick is a theoretical particle physicist whose career spanned from Hamburg to Durham and CERN. She's now a professor at Hamburg University. She's a member of the University Council, of the Academic Senate, and of the Faculty Council of the Mathematics, Informatics, and Natural Sciences faculty. And there in particular, she's involved in statutes since 2017 and the civil clause. So she will give us the status and discussions of the civil clause at University of Hamburg.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Michelangelo. Yes, so we are very proud having the civil clause in the main faculty. That means it's for mathematics, informatics, and natural sciences, physics, chemistry, and so on. And this we really use, as if the new position is, then the candidates have to accept, so to say, the civil clause. This is really something close to our heart. And we are convinced if university means research and education. And of course, research, as you have already nicely said, Jürgen, has to do with going new ways, explore the nature, explore everything, and have a freedom to do what we want. Yeah, science is a free thing and is international. And it has therefore a task to combine, to get the people together. This is something where we are really convinced. So immediately it is clear it can only be for civil purposes, and having also education things in mind, like music, yeah, it should combine and so on. So therefore, this kind of having such a civil clause is mandatory. Otherwise, we cannot do the research in the way we do. We collaborate all over the world, independent on religion or whatever. And that is fantastic. And this gives us really the freedom to get the best and to move forward in our science with all the knowledge and going new paths. So mandatory. So now, what do we have to keep in mind is the following. One should be aware that everything what you're doing, you can use for good and evil. So here I think we scientists have really the responsibility in order to keep our free, to do the freedom, doing the science what we want, we have also a big responsibility. Therefore, we should, of course, discuss openly and with many people what's now going to happen. Yeah, that everything you can use as a kind of dual use. Of course, you should define what you mean, but we should define precisely where are the boundaries, what we do not want. And for instance, one can also think about that the universities have a kind of an ethics commission. So these are the things that we also discuss within our university. And I know, for instance, from UK, John, maybe you're right, I got this information, that if, for instance, in UK, there is always in the institutes, an ethics commission. So in case there is some debate on projects which are of dual use, then it has been monitored whether one can do it or not. And I think that's really important. And something like this, maybe we could even do further and improve here at University of Hamburg. Yeah, this is what I think. But yeah, I believe that's all what I wanted to say for now. One thing noch. One thing what is very important, just in mind, that you can always do good and evil. We are obliged, I'm doing basic research, to publish. And this is something, if I'm in a public talk and the people ask me, are you not afraid you discover something which might have also bad consequences? And I say, yes, I don't know, because we go on new ways, we know new paths, and so on. But we publish everything. And to have the law and that we have to publish it, that means everybody knows it. I think that is the best thing. And this protects the outside best for all what could happen. And therefore, this is the last thing what I wanted to mention. This is, I think, we really have to keep. And when we have a dual use discussion, we should make sure that from our side, from the scientist side, we publish all what we find out so that everybody can read it. That's the best protection in my mind. So now I'm stopping.
Thank you, Gudi. Questions to Gudi? I have one. Jonathan before alluded to the possibility that Hamburg can have issues with a potential collaboration with the DESY opened to military research. Is that an actual discussion that is taking place?
Currently?
Yes, I mean, taking place at the level of administration, not just, people discussing it over lunch, which is a natural thing to talk. But I mean, is it a serious possibility?
Currently, I think that it will not happen at DESY, that we really have a fence in between and that we would lose, because all people here, we are mixed. Yeah, I'm university. Jenny will say a few words. She is DESY. We work together. This we could not do if there's some kind of really military research. Yes, indeed, if we have institutes doing military research, then the University of Hamburg would have problems. That's completely clear.
Sure.
Yeah, that would. But I don't think maybe Jenny knows more on the things that are ongoing here.
Okay, so we will hear more from Jenny later.
Yes.
And I see Maurizio now. He has a specific question.
Yes, it's a question for Gudrid, because I think you were very clear, and I appreciate what you said when you said that scientists should explain what they think. But I mean, I have a certain difficulty, because if I go back to what John said at the very beginning, which I totally share, it seems to me clear that there is no possibility of coexistence between any military research and basic research, because we are talking about that. I mean, isn't this already clear?
In principle, yes, but as I said, we do basic research. Some results from evil-minded people will be used to, for instance, let me say it like this. We need accelerator to really go forward closer to the Big Bang. We have to generate high energies. For instance, to generate these kind of particles, we need targets, yeah? To produce elementary particles, to get our collisions at this high energy, we just need target materials that will be smashed with high energy. Okay, high energy material you use where you have a quick temperature rise, and it should be radiation hard. It's clear, of course, would also be interesting for military parts, but that's not what we want. Yeah, I think you can use it, and therefore I think it is the best thing to do. When I do my target test, yes, we publish everything, and that's it. And I only take those materials that I need to get my positrons and nothing else. And that's it. So that is basic research, and the publication makes it sure. Some people may say, oh, wonderful. Maybe we could also use it for other things. That's what I mean. That is in our responsibility. That is where always dual use might in many things be possible, but we don't do it. And this statement I make, it's so to say, it's my responsibility to make sure that it cannot be used for military prospects from my side, from our side, from our scientist side. Was that a question? So therefore, it is not completely easy to completely disconnect basic science from how it could be used in later. Maurice, was it the right direction? Did I understand it correctly?
Well, I understand what you mean. What I think is that the effect of publishing something is the clear sign, and that it's a free research, and it's the principle of basic research. Then there can be also military applications, but once you distribute the information to everybody, the probability is much lower. What I'm saying is that if there is not a clear separation between the two worlds, the risk is that any effort you put into military research when you involve universities or research centers is to some extent a part of killing the basic research. Because you cannot have both together. Because also I'm not used to the civil clause, but I mean, as far as I understand, the civil clause is a sort of commitment of the universities to implement certain things. I have in front of me University of Hamburg statement in that respect. I think that in case of risks, or let's say in case of the perception of a government that there might be a risk, the civil clause can be swept out immediately without any problem. So to me, either there is a clear separation, or it's really difficult to imagine that basic research can continue its work.
Jenny?
Yeah,
if we're heading in the direction of a general discussion, then maybe we should keep it for the end.
I just
but if it is specific to
it's very specific for this, yeah, because it was now several times mentioned that it's sufficient if everything is published, and I think it's important, yeah, and necessary that everything is published, but actually, in the recent discussions which started now at DESY, I learned that this might not be enough, because you might also have situations where, for instance, military companies, yeah, weapons companies, want to have certain material properties measured, which they are very willing to publish, right? But the money would come, yeah, I mean, the money would, yeah, come from, yeah, whatever, Rheinmetall or whomever you want. So I think it's even more complicated, yeah, than just, or I mean, it could be a way, it needs discussion whether it is really sufficient to say, as long as everything is published, it's fine, regardless from where the money comes from, right? So that's all I wanted to add for now.
This is an important point, of course, and I think that we can come back to this at the end, because it is a significant point. So I suggest now that we broaden up a bit the perspective, and we move more to the international context. And for this, we have two presentations. The first one is by Lukas Engelkamp, who's a historian and a research fellow at the Institute for Peace Research and Security Policy at the University of Hamburg. His research focuses on the history of nuclear deterrence, the role of science in the Cold War, and the scholarly critique of deterrence theories and strategies. At the Institute for Peace Research and Security, he's particularly working on NATO's new military strategy and alternative defense concepts. Lukas, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I'm going to give you a little bit broader historical perspective. I hope that's interesting for you and somehow useful. If not, you can tell me afterwards. So I would like to go a little bit further in time and ask some conceptual questions, because I mean, for us today, maybe these categories of civil and military research are kind of normal, but if you think about it in as a useful division, they just came into being in the 19th century with the establishment of the modern university system. And if there were clear lines at some point between civil and military research, they already got blurred in the First World War. But interestingly, the collaboration between scientists and the military did not continue after the First World War. Basically, scientists, as everybody else, also got demobilized. But this really changed during the Second World War, and especially the US can be seen as a role model here. That the collaboration between civil scientists and the military that started in the Second World War was continued in the Cold War. One has to emphasize that for many scientists in the 1950s, this was not just because you could get lots of funding for your research in from the Pentagon or other government institutions, but because they saw it as their duty as citizens, as probably also today some people who are in favor of opening research facilities to military research would argue that it's the duty to contribute to the defense of free democratic societies. At least this was definitely what many people thought in the 1950s. So for them, it was basically not a problem at all. And of course, the positive experience of the Second World War and the defeat of Hitler played an important role here. But of course, as always, there's a caveat. And if one looks at it, one sees the problems, some of the problems already mentioned. Basically, science became securitarized and it lost its focus on the public and was much more focused on what governments wanted. And what that meant, of course, in practice is that a scientist wasn't simply judged according to his scientific credentials anymore, but questions of political orientation and of loyalty played a role. And who judges this? Who judges loyalty of a scientist? And I mean, the period of McCarthyism in the 1950s was, of course, an extreme case, but it shows basically the structural problems you get, that that people who were communists or were supposed to be communists, or people who simply didn't agree with the official policy of the United States, got into trouble, might have lost their jobs or worse. So this is something one maybe should think about. And of course, also, it's a question of legitimacy, maybe some people today also think that if we say we contribute to the defense of Germany, of NATO against Putin, which of course it's a valid argument you can make, but in the long run it might also get to a backlash. So if you take again the historical example, of course, in the context of the Vietnam War, there were lots of protests against this kind of research, and this actually led to really a crisis of legitimacy of science. And but this is, of course, also again a little bit ambivalent, because you could say that something like a civil clause movement started in the United States back then because there were lots of student protests against military-funded or affiliated research institutions and researchers on universities. But the result basically was that many of the official connections were severed, and the military-funded research disappeared from the universities. But in actuality, it just got much less transparent. So the research continued, but it was outsourced in private organizations, but basically there was still the civil and military research were still intertwined. So I could say a little bit more about Germany especially, but maybe I think I'm already over 5 minutes. Basically, just maybe one last point. In Germany there were different reactions. So it was not just like you can not just draw a line from, for example, the Göttingen 18, like Karl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, Otto Hahn, Werner Heisenberg, to the civil clause movement with the declaration that they wouldn't participate in nuclear research or nuclear weapons research. But for example, at Karl Friedrich von Weizsäcker's institute in Starnberg, they also worked on alternative military strategies. So for some people, they said, we don't want to have anything to do with military research anymore. Other people also with Karl Friedrich von Weizsäcker argued we have to think about different kinds of military research, different kinds of military defense. Just to give you an idea. Yes, so I hope that was useful for you, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Lucas. Questions for Lucas? No, we continue along these lines with a colleague of Lucas, and Götz Neuneck, our next panelist, is chair of the Federation of German Scientists. And until 2019, he was the deputy director of the Institute for Peace Research and Security Policy at the University of Hamburg. He was the head of the interdisciplinary research group on arms control and disarmament. And since 2001, he's speaker of a working group, Physics and Disarmament, of the German Physical Society. He's also a council member of the PAGWASH conferences on science and world affairs. Götz?
Thank you for the kind introduction, and also for giving me the chance to talk about this very complex subject. Let me first say that I'm not an employee by the University of Hamburg and not by DESY. I advised DESY in several diplomatic and dual-use issues to work openly, and I'm strongly support all those who see science as an open endeavor, and but I see also the problems which have been mentioned earlier. In my career, and that is not unimportant here, I was dealing more or less with military affairs, although I'm a peace researcher. So you see the dialectics here, which was already described by Lukas Mengelkamp, although he was focusing very much on the American environment. We have a different environment in Germany and different historical experiences and chances. And for example, if you look to IXFEL is on DESY ground and is a European consortium and has a civilian mandate. And when the organizers of IXFEL discovered that there's also a military application, we advised them to make an international conference to assess the potential, the dual-use potential of this fantastic research machine. And I think if you look to the report of this international conference, which was staffed not only by DESY and CERN members, but also by Swiss, Japanese, Russian, Chinese colleagues, which also built these kind of military relevant technologies, because X-ray laser was originally created as a military SDI project. And the conversion at the end of the Cold War brought this up, and now it is used as a civilian, fantastic instrument, but it again causes problems if we start talking about the ambivalence of research results. Gudrid was very correct by saying that publication is let's say, necessary condition for a peaceful purpose, but it is not explaining automatically that this could be used or misused by others. So if you publish, discover things, then these can be misused. And the problem here is that the definition of all these categories we are mentioned are a little bit more complex and do not solve automatically the ambivalence of scientific results. I also advised the DESY director to start a project to talk more with Chinese scientists, because in the civil clause debate, we also have to confess that other countries, as we call it, problematic countries, are also using civilian technologies for military purposes. And that is the case for many countries. It's not the core of science, but it is on the periphery, an option which was always there. And even the end of the Cold War did not solve that problem. So I absolutely welcome those institutions, individuals, and organizations who have a civilian clause, because this is a commitment, a personal or institutional commitment, only to work for civilian purposes. But this does not answer the problem that wars are still using scientific knowledge, and that scientists are participating in this. This is also true for Russian colleagues, for example. And that causes now problems, so that science as such, but also scientific institutions, come more and more under pressure from politics. Politics is very different in open society, democratic countries. It is different than in other countries. So I think the VDW, the Federation of German Scientists, which was founded after the Göttingen Declaration, names have been mentioned already, was always striving for the social responsibility of scientists. And the civilian clause is one important statement on this. But we also have to realize that this comes under pressure simply because politics is moving now in Germany in another direction. The DESY civil clause is a voluntary commitment, and I, as a member of the Ethics Commission of DESY, fully welcome a debate on this, which should include more substantive work about the nomenclature and the terminology we are using. So what is military research? What is military relevant research? What is civilian research? And what is security relevant research? So it's not only, by the way, a problem of war and peace, it's also a problem of economical power. And if you look to the BMBF paper, as well as the EU white paper, you see that there's also the argument that knowledge is misused, patents are misused, knowledge is by espionage or other issues going other ways and is threatening the economical development. I don't comment on this. I think many of these arguments now are overstretched. We Germans, we tend a little bit to move the pendulum from fully peaceful, everything is peaceful, everything is being regulated by laws and treaties and values, to the other direction. And now the pendulum is moving in the other direction. So I only can underline that a discussion in the workforce of DESY is absolutely necessary. And if a significant majority argues in the way others have argued here, I think the directorate should listen to that and should very clearly assess also the consequences of letting military people on the ground of the DESY territory. And that has consequences. I mean, the consequences are restrictions in access, no publication, classification of specific work. And I could imagine that some employers wouldn't accept that. So again, to round up my very short intervention here, is that I think science is an international, indeed open-minded thing and should not be restricted. But we also have to understand that policy is using pressure now for profiting more from scientific knowledge. But my answer simply, if you want military research, then build your own institutions. There's this, and this is my last comment and example in the guidelines, in the white paper of the EU, DARPA, the defense agency of the Pentagon mentioned. If the EU and Germany means we need such an agency, they simply should build this up and establish that. But it should not use scientific institutions to benefit from open scientific results. But this is my personal opinion. Once again, I'm stressing this, and I personally have worked more for diplomatic balance and diplomacy and finding ways to bridge conflicts. And of course, science can also play here an important role, as been mentioned earlier. But on the other side, this is at the moment very much problematic because even scientists don't speak much to each other. A dialogue is blocked between Russia and Germany, and that is also something which one should have in mind and could be part of the diplomatic component of science, because I think scientists are good ambassadors, and we should come back to this way for conflict resolution and not listen too much to those who have only war patterns in their minds. But this is again a personal statement, not anything coming from the Ethics Commission. We certainly will discuss in the DESY Ethical Commission the debate. And I'm happy to advise everyone who is interested in that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Götz. Thank you very much for these words. Comments or questions to Götz? Elke.
Thank you for your very interesting inputs. My question is, I have a little bit difficulty understanding what level of military research you're actually talking about towards all the different speakers. I mean, military research can be from highly classified research where you cannot get into the institution at all as a foreigner to, for example, I'm looking here at the Department of Defense sponsored research at universities, which basically all US universities are part of. And we still are collaborating with them very freely, and they are collaborating all over the world very freely. They have students from all over the world working on these projects, actually. And I think this is a very different level. And I think it's important to distinguish what level is actually meant when we're discussing this for DESY.
Yes, absolutely. Hannes?
But maybe just a word on that. I think it is not yet clear what is actually meant and what the directorate has in mind. They were talking at the moment on opening the research facilities for material research. This is one thing, but there could be quite a lot of other things coming later. So I think at the moment it's just not clear what implication then that has and what is really meant. It's more or less a test balloon at the moment.
Okay, let me try to give you an answer, Elke. It's nice to see you again after our China trip. I mean, we are all scientists and we define vectors and Hilbert space and all these kind of things. And you are right, one has to define what military research really means. So what is the end product? What is the goal of it, of this kind of work? This is an exercise which you have to do if you wanted to open civilian research to the military. The question is, what is the military? Is it only the Bundeswehr, or is it NATO members? Is it allies? Israel and the United States have a strong military research component in science. There's no doubt about it. There are fields which are highly relevant for the military. So you need, I think, and this is why I mentioned the terminology to define this. And of course, national laws help in this regard. I'll give you an example. If the EFI group makes an expertise and says we should skip the dual use distinction in general, that would be quite unlawful because there are demands and provisions by the arms export control. So we have lists of countries and we have lists of technology which are clearly earmarked as military technology. And most of the scientists are not very experienced on this. So you need indeed a handbook for defining exactly these kind of things. That would be my answer. That doesn't include that I can give you directly an answer, but we should also have in mind that we have in the Leopoldina DFG, the joint committee which defines what dual use of concern is and what is security relevant and what is not security relevant. But I think scientists have to be trained to understand that better, and they have to think about their own research and the end product which might comes out of it. And this is an old problem that if things are leaving the laboratory, scientists no longer care. On the other side, scientists are those who have the first knowledge about the results of their research, and they could participate in things like some kind of technology assessment. And then next step is, of course, who is participating in it, who is the end user. But don't forget, even a scientist has the basic law. Even, we have on one side the teaching research is free after Article 5, but we have also the Article 26 of the basic law, the Constitution of Germany, saying acts tending to and undertaken with intent to disturb the peaceful relations between nations, especially to prepare for war of aggression, shall be unconstitutional. So there are criteria here. Unfortunately, most of the scientists are not very much aware of it.
Jürgen.
Can comment?
Yeah.
I think can make the statement that every good research has some military implications, but it's not necessarily you to implement these military implications and consequences, because there is some distance between basic research, the development step, the testing step, the final weapon, and the use of that weapon, and the consequences of using that weapon. So there is a longer process involved from the basic research to the ultimate consequences for military purposes. And the military purposes are often developing destructive means. It's basically to destroy something. Of course, there are supplementary devices like information systems and so on that are not so destructive, but they are part of a weapon system. And the weapon system has this destructive purpose. And as Götz-Nonek said, when the enemy has these weapons, you see them as threatening. You should also take into consideration that the enemy sees our weapons also as destructive. And for that reason, we have the national and international laws of regulating weapons, arms control and export control. And the purpose of export control is make sure that the enemy does not get the most threatening of these research products. Yeah, and so here you see a distinction, because these export control laws make this distinction between allowed exports and not allowed exports, and it's not easy to make that and verify that clear distinction between these. But there is this law, and there are experts on trying to find this distinction, even for information systems, which artificial intelligence can you export and which you cannot export. And this applies to space systems, for nuclear systems, for every type of technologically oriented research. Yeah, and so I would not say simply because every research has a military relevance, that does not mean you cannot make a distinction. And you don't have to be explicitly develop weapon systems. You have to leave it to others. And that's a political process to minimize the effect, the destructive effect of research. It's a political process. It's a funding process in the international arena, in the national arena. But you can try to maximize the non-destructive effect of research in the academic environment, which is particularly the university systems show. And the purpose of the dual-use conceptions is to blur and minimize the distinction between civil and military research.
Thank you, Jürgen. I see Sonia also has a comment to make, but it's clear that we are getting now into a more general discussion, and which I think should be open to go across different directions. But I would like to give an opportunity to our two final panelists to give their perspective so that we do get the full picture, and then we can come back to this. And Sonia, of course, you're welcome to bring up your points after Jenny and Sasha. So we would start from Jenny, who will tell us about the situation at DESY. She is a staff scientist. She's a particle physicist and experimentalist at DESY, and she leads the Science with Lepton Beams group, as well as the Physics and Detectors effort of International Development Team for the ILC. Since 1997. She participated in several large-scale particle physics experiments international at the DESY laboratory at CERN and at Fermilab in the US. Jenny.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks to everybody. I would like to update you a bit of what the actual status of the discussion at DESY now is. So picking up a bit where Hannes left it in the beginning. Because meanwhile, I think we have quite an intense discussion, both among employees, also in the scientific committee, which is the representation of the scientific and technical personnel at DESY, but also with the directorate. And I think many people have exactly all the worries, which also John summarized so nicely in the beginning of sort of the, say, direct implications this might all have on our working environment in terms of restriction on campus, restrictions on whom we can hire, and yeah, whether things have to be published, where our funding comes from, what yeah, whether this restricts our freedom of research, and so on and so forth. I think, however, it is becoming much more clear that in the end, the first step is indeed to understand what actually the goal of the whole exercise is, and what the scope is, which we are talking about. So, for instance, Beate Heinemann, our current particle physics director and soon to be director general, clearly said that anything which would require access restriction to campus is not at all in the scope of the discussion for the moment, and considered completely unrealistic. Also, because actually the city of Hamburg has the complete opposite wish. They want to integrate DESY into a science city in the west of Hamburg, where there's actually pressure, apparently, as I learned, to open up the DESY campus completely, to remove the fence completely, which of course has other problems with, operating accelerators and so on. Yeah, so this is but you see, so this is, I think, I was very happy to hear that there was a quite clear statement on this. Nevertheless, I think I think it's also in the minds of the members of the directorate, I have the impression, not really clear, what how far they want to go, and what the goal in the end should really be. Because I think people are very aware that once you say you completely drop this statement about civil or research for civil and peaceful purposes only, then of course you open yourself up to anything. So we need all these definitions also, as many others said, got said, and so on, right? I mean, we have to first of all understand ourselves all the meaning of the existing terminus technici there, and because people, I mean, when you talk about dual use, this there are definitions, of course, which are somehow established among experts, but it's maybe different from what even a normal physicist think of using these terms. So I think in that sense, it's very important that we are having now all these discussions and are educating ourselves. But we should. So there is, concretely speaking, a task force being established from the scientific committee to discuss this now intensely with the directorate, and there's also a strong pushback on the first idea to have already a conclusion of this in December for the next scientific council, and Stiftungsrat is whatever it is in English. So for the governance bodies of DESY, for their meetings in December, to have a final answer. So I think there we are pushing back quite a bit on doing anything in haste, because it is a very difficult discussion, and we really need to understand what we want to do. But as I alluded to in the beginning, I think an important aspect is this also in this is which funding sources do we want to, use or allow to contribute to our funding, and are there any dangers of saying, okay, it sounds like a small add-on in the first place, but after a couple of years it completely determines that all base resources have to be used to make excellent conditions so that you can take the money from military companies or the Ministry of Defense or so on. Clearly this is not what we're talking about now, but I think it's important to draw a line, and to say, really define what is thinkable and what is really, and what would really sort of completely change and destroy the character of the lab. You're muted, Michelangelo.
Thank you. I was thanking you for your contribution. I was calling for the questions, and I was agreeing with the main point of your message, which is that it's absolutely crucial that DESY itself defines what would be the potential directions that this evolution might take. I have to say that I find comfort in the fact that they don't know themselves exactly what they want. Because if they knew, then it would be much, much harder to fight it somehow. While in this process, clearly there is an indication of potential reluctance also at the level of the management. And certainly this is a situation in which the feedback coming from the scientists and the staff at DESY could be very, very important. In other words, they're playing with ideas and see whether they resonate or not. And if they find out that they never resonate, that clearly would be very important. John.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Jenny for this update on the internal discussions within DESY. I think it's clear that these discussions are not taking place in a vacuum. They're taking place in a political environment where there are pressures. We heard about them from previous speakers. So I can't help feeling that the present and future directorate of DESY, is so uncertain what to do because they don't want to do what certain people want them to do. If you see what I mean.
Yeah.
And so maybe we should think, how we can help them resist those external pressures.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good point for discussion. And Serena.
Yeah, hello. I'm also a scientist at DESY. I'm also in the scientific committee. I don't really agree with this positive view. So I'm not so sure that the DESY directorate doesn't want to do it. So I think that's my personal opinion, absolutely. But my feeling in the last few months was not so positive.
Of course, we trust your judgment. I mean, you guys know more than we, and we're here, in fact, to listen to your perspective.
Maybe they feel they need the money.
Of course, DESY needs the money. That could be the reason, but some comments also that we need to do our duty for our country. This speaks for me in another direction. And so that's why I would not be so supportive of this idea that they don't want to do it, we need to help them. I think we need to clear state if we are for this or not.
Jenny.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, what I said is they maybe they didn't define yet for themselves in very precise, if you want scientific technical terms, how far they want to go, right? But I think there's clearly a general feeling, and at least for some of the directors, maybe not all, that to mix the question whether, due to changing times and Ukraine war and what have you, we all have to, defend democracy with weapons, or whether this has to, DESY is the right place where this has to happen, right? Like, I don't know who was it, but somebody says if the government wants military research done, they should found a military research institute for that, right? So and I think this is something which I guess is important to somehow separate these discussions, because I think there is probably also a much stronger, say, basis for saying, okay, we don't think DESY should be the place where this happens because of all the potential restrictions which we discussed, from separating from the discussion whether morally at the moment, one wants to do this at all or not, where there might be much more diverse opinions also, among the DESY staff, to be honest. Huh?
Okay. I Good, Peter. Again, allow me to move to Sasha so that we can really complete this perspective also from DESY, and then we come back to the general discussion. So Sasha graduated from Moscow State University in '93. He had position, well, first he was at DESY Zeuthen for his PhD. And then he had the postdoc and research scientist position at the University of Chicago. And since 2004, he's a staff member at DESY. He worked on several international collaborations, from the H1 experiment at DESY, and the KTEB experiment at Fermilab, Atlas at CERN, and now he's at the Belle 2 experiment in Japan at KK. Sasha.
Okay, thank you, Michelangelo, for this introduction. Yeah, I mean, there are many opinions already discussed, and just a few points here. So first of all, indeed, the situation is not 100% clear what exactly DESY Directorate wants. So I think the discussion actually started earlier than this year. So based on the Ethics Committee yearly review report, and yeah, so it started last year. But it accelerated in June when we had this open discussion at the scientific with the employees. And yeah, there is a pressure to take a decision by the end of the year, which I actually don't quite understand why there is this strong pressure to do that. So this is to be clarified, actually. I don't think there is a common opinion between DESY directors on how to proceed. But I think they do feel an opportunity to, yeah, to use this. So, okay, so for some of them are also university professors at universities which are in civil clause, so some at the University of Hamburg, quite a few. And if you read the statements, it's interesting. So they take very seriously the civil clause. So they say that unlike many universities, DESY doesn't have a civil clause, and therefore we can do military research. So this is actually, I don't know. So this needs to be clarified, to be discussed if university is ready to collaborate with DESY or not under these conditions, and if their top professors actually want to do that, that is something, I don't know, needs to be clarified. Of course, there are many concerns from people at DESY. I mean, this was all discussed. So to me, primarily, our concern is ethical. Many of us decided for fundamental science because it's least connected to military. So, I mean, there are connections, obviously. You do good science, you produce excellent results, which can be used and misused, but it's at least you don't do it yourself, and it's least connected. And of course, you have to publish publicly. So everything which is published is as deep as possible, not only the scientific papers, but also tools to produce the scientific results should be published. And in fact, this was where we moved in the past, before the war, before the Ukrainian war, we actually were moving in this direction altogether in the European Union. So if you would apply for a European grant, you would be always signing on the items that you will publish your results openly. And yeah, so this was one of the requirements. So if we move away from that, it's of course not a good thing. The question is raised, okay, do we need to move from that? Because there's a changed political situation and we have to defend, I don't know. So I think there should be a line drawn. So we should try to follow as much as possible, which is a reasonable development. On the other hand, we should try to resist as much as we can something which goes beyond what we stand for. So, fundamental research, openness, and these are things which must be there. And also research which is not for a country or a group of countries, but for the humanity. This is, of course, extremely important, and this brings people together. That's what we should do, right? And we are sign up for that, and yeah. Okay, there is a discussion that indeed the lab wants to, university wants to open lab, open science city in Hamburg, building up a campus around DESY. So, okay, so this we thought is the future, and I hope it is still the future for what we will have in the end. So now there is a question: is can we allow a gray area? Can we allow half military, half civilian research? So I actually find this is extremely dangerous, even worse than a clear separation, clear wall between the two, because you never know. So this is a huge security risk for people who would be working here, right? So if for some adversary, if there is a person working at this institution and they don't know if it's a civilian or military research, it's actually not obvious. So many people will be under potentially threat. And of course, if you have a military research in the middle of the few million city, I don't know. So this is also potentially security danger for the civilian population. So do we want that? I don't think so. So yeah. So we talk about now in this war which is going on. So what is a valid military target, what is not, and if you start blurring this borders, I don't know. So this will be endangering the population, I think. So there was a statement that if you want. If you really need the military research, it should be a separate facility. I think this is what one should go, or at least it should be outside the city. I mean, this if you look at examples in US and so on, this is the case, right? Nobody builds a lab which will be doing military research in the middle of the 2 million city. Okay, so I think this is more or less it, what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Sasha. Thank you. So we can put this back into the global perspective and go back to those who wanted to make comments before. If you allow me, I just wanted to inject maybe one more consideration. It's been mentioned directly or indirectly several times, the issue of cooperation with institutions who do also carry out military research, the possibility that maybe Hamburg University scientists might boycott or stop cooperation with DESY. And, you know, I wonder how we all feel about this, because it's not just institutions, you know, we could also look at it in a more global terms at the level of countries. And of course, when there was the Soviet Union, we were cooperating with Russian scientists, even though Soviet Union as their global host and supporting their research was, you know, on the other side during the Cold War. Then it was precisely maintaining cooperation with them, which is what we are proud of, you know, that's what Science for Peace should stand for. So to create and raise barriers of potential cooperation with institutions that do have also affiliation with military research is not necessarily what we have been advocating, and in fact, we continue collaborating with colleagues at Livermore, Los Alamos, and these places. So how indeed, what is the good way to approach this issue in case, say, that DESY did really incorporate some of these activities? I'm curious to hear comments about that. So Peter had his hand up since a while, so
yeah. A few words about Sasha said. My opinion is also that we keep the civil research separately from the military research. There's a big pressure for both to find new ways of cooperation. But at the moment, at least, the way for the civil research could be only to work on some special contracts, even paid or not paid, to fulfill the duties for the society, in the sense that we have to contribute with our knowledge to save the society and the development. From that point of view, both fields should be kept distinguished and separately. That's my opinion.
You're muted.
Oh, sorry, I'm muted. I was calling on David to speak up, but I was muted. David. No, we cannot hear you. Now we can, but you should speak louder, I guess.
Like this. I'm the research assistant to Petra Sitte, who's the research policy speaker of Die Linke im Bundestag. We were invited to DESY last year by Dr. Dosch, who gave us a great tour of the site, mainly because he's very worried about the 1.5 billion euros he needs for Petra 4. And he's been campaigning for that for years. He comes to the Bundestag regularly and speaks to all members of all parliamentary groups about this. I think that he's trying to please at this point Stark-Watzinger and the ministry, because he wants that money from her, and she just started that initiative for dual use and military research. And so I can pretty well imagine that he doesn't really know what he's getting himself into, but was probably given the hint by her that she would like to see that, and that would ease the process. So my advice would be to prolong the discussion at DESY for a bit longer, and at least until the next elections, because we'll have a different minister at that point. And I think there's a broad majority among all factions at the Bundestag at this point to grant DESY those 1.5 billion, because the site is so important and it has the potential to be among the top 2 or 3 research institutions globally in that field. So I think one way or another, they're going to get that money. And so he doesn't have to go that step at this point. I thought the last speaker made a very, very important point that has been coming up in international conflicts over and again in Ukraine and in Gaza and other places. The definition of a legitimate target for military attack and espionage. And as soon as DESY officially declares that it does military research, it becomes a target for all sorts of espionage and sabotage, et cetera, et cetera. So that in itself would immediately change the character of the research there. And the other point I wanted to stress that Götz Neuneck said is the difficulty. We have to talk very precisely about definitions of dual use and military use, because armies, 80% of military endeavors are logistics. So armies use everything from Band-Aid to water tanks to radios to cars, and everything is potentially dual use. And if you want to define what you want to do and what is forbidden, you have to talk very long and very clear about what is military use actually, and what is the difference between security relevant research and actually weapons development. And I think in the case of DESY, that would be a very important differentiation that you should work on before discussing anything else, because obviously the opponents of the civil clause often argue that once we go about that strictly, we have to prohibit all sorts of research on just about everything, and if we want to propose civil clause, we have to be very precise about what we mean by that. And I think pretty soon it will be clear that DESY would not. The only possible use that DESY could have in that field would be weapons development very immediately.
Thank you, David. Jonathan.
Yes, I also think that the question of keeping, well, first and foremost, keeping civil and military research separated institutionally, but also in the goals of research is very important, because this is one of the tools that is being used to actually normalize the militarization of science in Germany right now. In the BMBF paper from the Ministry for Research and Education, you can see very clearly, and they write it explicitly, that a lot of German scientists are right now still very cautious about this melting together of civil and military research because of their historic memory, basically. So the Second World War, it is 80 years ago, but it's still very much present in people's minds in Germany. And of course, we cannot imagine a Second World War or even a First World War without the works of science that made this possible. So in the First World War, gas weapons by Fritz Haber, physical chemists, in the Second World War, of course, nuclear weapons, and of course, all kinds of other technical achievements like airplanes for air bombings, etc. And I think the effort right now that is being undertaken to fuse these two areas of research together is an effort to overcome this, I would say, maybe a historical hurdle that is still present in a lot of people's minds in Germany. Because then you exactly have this this question of, all right, so if we have civil clauses, then we have to forbid everything, right? Because everything can be used for dual purposes, and that's why this whole thing doesn't make any sense. And this is a very a very clever way, but also a very dangerous way to normalize research going in big form for military purposes. This whole topic also of DESY touches upon the question of academic freedom also, and especially when it comes to money. And I think it became very clear in the previous comment about the financing of DESY, because most of the money that DESY gets is from federal pots, and of course through this there exists a big dependence. At the same time, I would say this is a lot better than being dependent on private contractors, private companies. And this is also one of the aspects of this academic freedom that is enshrined in the Basic Law of Germany. So scientists should be able to independently decide on what they perform research on. At the same time, they should also be protected from state or government power, which we also, of course, saw in the Second World War was a big issue. So their politically neutral scientists were the good ones because they didn't put in question the orders that came from government officials. And I think this is a question that has to be or can only be answered in a political way. So this question of academic freedom, what we have to, as students, but also as, of course, practicing scientists, have to decide for what do we want to exercise this academic freedom for. So do we want to use it to produce weapons of mass destruction or other kinds of tools for information processing that has explicit military use, or do we want to use it for something better? Sasha said it very nicely, I think. Do we want to produce science or perform science that is in the interest of particular interests, or do we want to perform science that is in the interest of everybody, of humanity, I think you said. And this, this is the basic question that we need to answer. And I think also in the question of scientific corporations, I also agree that it's we have to be very careful about limiting cooperation also with institutions that might have entanglement with military research. If you look into China, there has been a lot of publication recently in Germany about this entanglement with military institutions, and of course with the purpose of strengthening this doubt against scientific cooperation with China. The Federal Ministry for Education and Research has also begun speaking of restricting scientific cooperation with China because of security concerns. And this talk of military research being entangled with the civil institutions is being instrumentalized to say that, okay, now we cannot cooperate at all anymore. And this is something that we have to fight against, because this will only lead to isolation and the destruction of bridges. Yeah. The same question is also about Israel, right? So we want to stop everything.
Jonathan, allow me to interrupt you, because we want to leave room also to others to contribute to the discussion. In particular, Sonia has been waiting for a while, so I would ask Sonia to speak.
Right. Of course, there are lots of things one could say, but I plan to say something very simple in a sense. Why does DESY have to do anything related to military research? Are there not enough scientists across the globe that work directly for military research? How many scientists work for arms companies? No war after 1945 was possible without scientists participating in their preparation and execution. And of course, the Gaza war is sort of the most tragic example of what scientists do. So why is it necessary to change civil institutions in a further arm? It's no necessary. I mean, they want to do military research, that's bad enough per se, right? But let them do it where they already do it. So that's for me the basic question. The other thing about the financing, I find that interesting, and maybe the scientific committee of DESY could put that clearly on the table and ask whether that's a point, really. Yeah. And the third thing, and then I stop, is which means would we have to fight against this development? Because of course, I agree, there is a huge political context for these things. Even if in the case of DESY, it would turn out it is a little tiny thing of money, right? There is a huge development. There is a change in political atmosphere and pressure, etc. So, but that's a big thing. So my basic two questions are, why do civil institutions have to be transformed? And second, what can we do to stop that? Where are our sort of tools for doing that? Thanks, Michelangelo.
Yes, thank you, Sonia. Unfortunately, I think that across the world, we've been seeing major revolutions happening without a real need and doing great damage overall. So in a sense, unfortunately, this wouldn't be a novelty in the landscape. Slava, you're next.
Hello, everybody. I hear you during about 2 hours and cannot understand what are you discussing. In Russia, we have scientific civilian centers and scientific military centers. They do not intersect each other. People do not communicate each other. This is completely different level of security. If DESY would like to make military research, welcome. But in this case, DESY will disappear from the geographical map. This place will be restricted, and all the scientists in DESY will be lost for science. That's my opinion.
Well, it's not necessarily so, because we do have examples in the West of large institutions in which the two activities can coexist, and that is exactly one of the issues here. But Maurizio.
Well, I'm not surprised by the fact that there is consensus, mainly among governments, to increase the amount of military research. this is to some extent unavoidable. And I personally against, but that's life. What I think is really important is that fundamental research, basic research, and it's important to say this clearly, can survive. Because if there is a transformation of an institution that does fundamental research into military research, either you make that complete separation with fences, or it cannot work. So, to me, the real point is that the scientific community should stand in favor of keeping alive fundamental research. Then if someone wants to transform an institution into a military institution, it's something else. And this brings me, and this will be my last point, to a reflection, because I am wondering what is the real role of the political, let's say, dimension into this change of attitude. One of the previous colleagues who intervened has explained that perhaps there is also a part of this attitude of DESY which is due to a sort of internal, let's say, reasons in Germany. Fine. But the same trend has also appeared in other countries. And I would not like that we forget another point that to me it's even more important and to some extent dangerous than what is happening in DESY, which is what has happened at CERN starting 2 years ago, when just days after the start of the problems between Russia and Ukraine, the Council of CERN took a decision on which we have already discussed many times, which is a clear, in my opinion, invasion of a field that should have been kept exempt from political invasions. So to some extent, my opinion is that if there is now, let's say, to take position should not be on specific actions, but rather to make, let's say, a declaration of how important it would be to keep fundamental research alive. Because as one of the speakers said, this is really an important principle and it's important for everybody, not only for a given country.
Yes, I think that is a very important message and certainly the way to go. It's 7 o'clock. We've gone through our 2 hours of discussions and presentations. It's been very, very helpful. I myself got some more information, which is very, very useful in this context. It's absolutely clear, however, that we are not in a position yet in which we can judge what is happening, but it's also equally clear that it's very, very important that our community brings a message. And several of the points that have been raised today, I believe, should be formalized in a more clear way and should be brought to the attention of those who are discussing these issues. I hope that the scientific committees of DESY that support the DESY management in their decisions are exposed to this discussion, and through those committees there is an opportunity to bring a bit of wisdom into all of this. I pass the floor back to Hannes, who's the leader of the coordinator of the Science for Peace forum, because I assume he will also have a few final words before leaving us. Hannes.
Thanks a lot, Michelangelo. Thanks a lot for chairing this session, and thanks a lot for all the panelists for their contributions and everybody who made a contribution in the discussion. I think the discussion was very, good, very useful, and there were many points brought up which will help in the discussion, in the further discussion at DESY. So I think, Dean, this was excellent. And what I learned from the discussion is, again, a confirmation that we perhaps need maybe even stronger civil clause and DESY or statement which clarifies very exactly what we want to do and what we don't want to do. And on the other hand, then that it's also the personal commitment of everybody, whether he or she wants to do any research which has connections to military. This is exactly what we also have in the petition which has been launched at DESY and which will be rather soon be open to anybody to sign. With this, I would like to thank again everybody for this really very good and excellent discussion. I think it was very useful, and I wish you a very good evening, morning, or night, and hope to see you soon again in one of our Science for Peace forums.